In this lecture, we're going to learn about assignments. And the basic idea I really want to drive home here is that after a variable is initialized, like we've been doing all along, you can later assign a new value to it. For example, here we have var1 declared. It is an integer. We can print it out and it is going to print 1, 2, 3. But later in the program, we can put in another value. For example, here we are putting in a 55. And if we print var1, it's going to be 55 this time. The same idea can be extended to doubles. You see here we are doing the same thing. Booleans, we are doing the same thing here. The state is declared false. And we are printing that, and after we are changing this to a true value, and if we print that, it's going to be true. One thing you really need to be careful about is if you are doing auto type deduction, the type is not very apparent by looking at the declaration of the variable here. For example, here, by looking at auto var3, we don't really know what that is. And it is very easy to try and put in a value that is illegal. For example, here, we have deduced an unsigned integer, which is only going to store positive numbers, but we are putting in a minus 22. And this is going to be a disaster. We're going to get a compiler error, and this is going to be bad. So be careful when you are doing auto type deduction in your assignments that you do to your variables. This is really all we have to share in this lecture. Let's hop over to Visual Studio and show you this in action. Okay, here I am in my working folder. The project we're going to be working on is 49 here, assignments. I am going to grab my template files and put that in this folder here. And I am going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. So let's close whatever it is we have now and open the folder. And we're going to close the welcome screen here. We don't want it, and remove whatever we don't want from this file here. The first thing we want to do is put in the code for our integer variable var1 and show you that you can assign a new value to it after it was initialized. And if we run this code, we're going to see var1 to be 1, 2, 3. And the second statement is going to say var1 equals 55. That's what we're going to see. Let's bring up our terminal and we are going to run the task to build with GCC. And if we hop over here in the terminal and do dir, we're going to see that our rooster.exe file is in here. If we run it, we're going to see var1, 1, 2, 3, var1, 55, exactly what we expect. We have stored in a 1, 2, 3 at initialization using braced initialization here, but after, later on in our program, we have decided to put a different value in this variable here, essentially reusing it to store something else. This is the basic idea here. We can do the same things with doubles, but before we do that, let's put in a separation line so that we can see these things clearly in the terminal. And we're going to go down and put in our code for a double. So we have a double variable called var2. Initially, it has 44.55 in, and then we're going to assign a new value to it, and that's going to be 99.99. If we print that out, we're going to see that. Let's build and see this in action. We're going to build with GCC. If we run the program now, it's going to say var1 is 1, 2, 3, var1, 55, but we're also going to see that var2 starts out 44.55, but after we put in the 99.99, it's going to show up here. Okay, let's put in another separation line because we're going to need that in a minute. We can do the same things with Booleans. Here, we are using this as just an example, but this same concept essentially extends to any other kind of variable you're going to have in your C++ code. If you initialize it with some value, you have the option to change that value later on in your program by assigning that value to that variable. Essentially what we are doing here. The variable state, which is a bool, was initialized to false. We're going to print that out, and notice that we have this setting to allow us to see true or false instead of ones and zeros. We have seen this in a few lectures back. And later on, we are assigning true to this state and we are printing that. So if we print these things out, we're going to see false and true for the state here. So let's build. We're going to use GCC, and the build is good. If we run the program, we're going to see false and true, and it is exactly what we expect. Again, you really need to be careful when you are using auto type deduction, because you might have some serious problems if you are not paying attention. Let's put in the code so that we can play with it. Here we have a variable called var3, and the type of it is not specified explicitly. We are letting the compiler deduce this. And because our initializer here is an unsigned integer, the compiler is going to deduce that it is an unsigned integer. The problem will come if you try to store in a negative number. The compiler is not going to give you a compiler error. It is going to silently put in some garbage value that we don't really want in there. We want a -22, and you can see that this is what the compiler is turning our value into. We want a -22 in this var3, but if you hover over this minus sign here in Visual Studio Code, you're going to see that the value that we have in is not what we put in. We put in a -22, and we are getting a really large number, close to 4 billion. So this is really something that can go silently wrong in your code, and you're going to have a hard time trying to figure out why your code is not doing whatever it is you want. So be careful about this. Let's try and build this. So we're going to build with GCC. The build is going to be good. You're going to see that we're not even going to get a compiler error. If we run this, and we're going to see that var3 is exactly what Visual Studio Code guessed. And it is not good. It is this value here. And the problem is that the compiler is silently putting in a garbage value and not what we want here, because var3 is basically not capable of storing negative numbers. So the compiler is going to do its best and put in a garbage value. And this is not what you want, and you need to be aware of this. This is really all we set out to do in this lecture. I hope you know about assignments. And be careful when you are doing assignments on variables whose types are deduced with auto. And we're going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to try and recap what we saw in this chapter. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.